Terry Harris was last seen on February 27.
What have you done?
Can you tell me everything that you remember about that day?
Oh, I made a big weird speech at work where I told everyone to go and...
What are you going to do with him?
Have you got any acid?
There's lemon juice in the fridge.
Fairbank's coming after you. You'll be watching your kids. You need to be very careful.
We can't just lie and pretend this never happened.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
Hello, RTS gang. Thank you so much for choosing to join us today. I'm Talusha Kalani. I'm the commissioning editor with Sky Comedy, and I'm here to introduce this panel to discuss our wonderful comedy drama, Frayed, which is made by award-winning Merman and Sarah Kendall. I've been a fan of Sarah's since I first saw her do stand-up in 2004, I think. I've seen all of her Edinburgh Fringe shows, so I was delighted to have the opportunity to work with her, thanks to Sarah, Clelia and Sharon Horgan, and all at Merman Productions, who are so brilliant at championing female comedy talent. So Frayed is an hour-long comedy drama, and there is an abundance of both comedy and drama. We share it with the ABC in Australia, and it's acquired by HBO Max in the States, where it's been embraced by both of their audiences. And for those of you who don't know it, and if you don't, please check out Series 1, which is available on Sky. The show is about Sammy, an Australian woman living a very comfortable life in London until her husband dies in a hilarious sex accident. Sexident, shall we call it? Leaving her widowed with 2 children and financial strife. So she has no choice but to return to her working class family in Newcastle, Australia, and kind of relive her teen years. I don't want to give away too much for anyone that hasn't seen it, but we leave on a cliffhanger. A calamitous event has occurred, and this is where we rejoin them for the second series. Sammy has to protect herself and her kids from jail, and the stakes are higher than ever. But she's still dealing with a bunch of fucking idiots. So that's where we are with the second series. We at Sky are enormously proud of the world Sarah, Clelia, our director Shaun, and the team have created. It's hugely enjoyable, very funny, and I can't wait for you to see this second series, which you can do from 23rd of February, 10 p.m. on Sky Max, Now TV, and the whole of the second series will also be available as a box set. And now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel, Sarah, Clelia, Shaun, and our host, Boyd Hilton.
Thanks, Talusha. Thank you. Welcome to this fantastic panel to discuss Series 2 of Frayed. We've got Sarah Kendall, who's created, writes and stars in the show and plays Sammy Cooper. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Clelia Mountford, who is the co-founder of Merman, who developed and executive produced the series. Hi, Clelia.
Hi.
And Shaun Wilson, who directed all of Series 2 and most of Series 1. Hi, Shaun.
Hi, how are you?
I think it's fair to say, Sarah, that Series 1, as Talusha mentioned, ended on a big cliffhanger, a death.
Yes.
And I think it's by the time you got to the end of that first series, what started out as a fairly, I think initially as a fairly intimate portrayal of a family and their troubles and turmoils and issues, turned into, felt like by the end, and particularly with how you ended the first series, quite a much more kind of spectacular, multifaceted, loads of characters, big ensemble thing. Did you always plan it that way from the beginning, that it would escalate in that way?
Not really. There was this idea that this was an event that I was going to be sort of barreling towards. So that was kind of, it's sort of weird, the process by which you sort of, you write the pilot episode and then you get commissioned for another episode. You don't sort of just get commissioned for 6 episodes and then map the whole thing out. But it was this thing that we'd certainly, Clelia and I had discussed about this being the season finale. And with each episode, as I was writing it, it started to feel more like it was the most natural, most inevitable conclusion to what was happening to those characters. You know, you never want these things to be a sort of melodramatic act of God. It's got to feel like it's all been planted from episode 1. So once we kind of confidently went, right, this is where we're headed, it was all about making that feel like the most organic consequence of it truly being the things that had been planted and felt very organic to the story. So yeah, I think we sort of certainly from the writing perspective, I started to really gain confidence in that by about episode 3. I kind of felt it felt like a good season finale to me.
And did you have the idea of the character who dies at the end? I don't know why I'm hedging my bets as if everyone hasn't seen it already, but well, you know.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, go. Yeah.
Okay. That he would be an abusive father, for example. Like, did you want to portray that, and then the death would be a consequence of that?
Yeah, I mean, this was a storyline that I had done as an Edinburgh show. I did an Edinburgh show in 2015, I think, called Touchdown. And in that show, it was about a friend of mine who had a father who, was abusive. And I'd sort of decided when I wrote this show and wrote this world, because that was also set in Australia in the late 80s. So I'd sort of done those as Edinburgh shows and had worked through some of these plot ideas. And I thought, well, I'm going to use that in this show because I sort of really fleshed that out when I'd done it in Edinburgh. But then I thought, this is television. This is not a live show. You can fictionalize so much more. With a live show, it's really got to be a thing that has happened to me. That's certainly how I sell my shows. But with television, I thought I can kill him. I can have a shotgun that we plant in. I can put the shotgun in the wall in Act 2, and I can fire it in Act 5. So I loved that. I loved that, and I loved taking a group of people and putting them under that much pressure. I mean, that's sort of a writer's dream, is to really put all your characters in the most extreme amount of pressure. To keep it interesting. Yeah.
Clelia, I think it's safe to say that Merman in many ways almost specializes in comedies that have a very dramatic underlying tone to them, that they're very happy to bounce between comedy and drama within them. Was that partly why you wanted to work with Sarah in the first place and why you wanted to work on this show in the first place?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say Merman specialise in killing characters.
No.
But yes, I mean, we're interested in story and grounding those stories in truth and reality. We don't necessarily want to do something just for the sake of the joke. It comes from character and creating that world. And I'd seen Sarah's stand-up for a long time, and she came in to talk to me and said, I've got this idea about this family. It's set in Australia, and I heard Australia, and I thought, well, I'm going there. I've never been, so whatever, let's make it. Yes, but I loved the way she told stories in her 1 hour stand-up, so I knew she understood structure and character development and those lovely twists and turns that she does so well. So it really appealed to Sharon and myself. The depth of it is really interesting to us.
When it comes to that tone, I find it fascinating when you have, issues like abuse and addiction, run through this. And yeah, it is flat out funny, a lot of the time. Is that, was that tone there from the start when you're reading the scripts? And, how did you, and what input did you have in kind of making sure you get that right? Because it's a hard thing to get right, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you have to get that tension right. You've got to earn your jokes as well, and make the characters suffer a bit, and then you have the relief when you get that laughter. I think it was more about just not going to one extreme for the comedy, not making, I mean, it does get very broad and physical, but also not melodramatic with the drama, and just keeping it very real and believing that those characters are so well drawn and so clearly done that only they could say that, like the Jim character, he's so well established, and I think he's inspired by possibly a family member of Sarah's. But once you draw him so well, you can go with the joke and that he would say these slightly silly things, but at the same time you give him a heart and you show there's another side to him, and he's vulnerable and he loves his family and he wants to belong, and he, that's very important to him. So I think that's all part of the process.
I'm here, baby. Don't panic, okay? Just stay in your room. I'm going to sort this.
How
And put some music on. I don't want you listening to this.
What should we put on?
I don't know. Anything.
Doesn't feel right, Mum.
Get back in your room.
Sammy, you know I hate the pigs. All right, I have a big problem with authority figures, especially male ones with mustaches. Especially if their mustache is shaped like Dad's was. Actually, anybody who looks like Dad. But anyway, I don't understand why we're not telling the cops.
Because Terry is a cop. That makes my son a cop killer.
They're just kids. Just say it was an accident.
Police aren't gonna go, "Pip, pip. Run along, kids, it was an accident, off you go."
What is that?
There was a baton.
Can you be serious? On Dynasty, Blake Carrington caught his son in a homosexual tryst and then accidentally killed his son's lover. Now, he pled guilty.
Okay, Jim, even manslaughter, Lenny's gonna go to jail, all right? Do you know what they will do to that kid in prison? I mean, he can barely survive high school.
Oh, yeah, I will admit that his thick blonde hair and peaches and cream complexion could be a problem in jail.
Yeah.
Can we come out now?
No!
Calling the police.
No!
I want to go to the police and tell them it was an accident.
Okay, baby, but you saw what the law did to our family, okay? It left us homeless. I cannot put you in their hands.
I'd rather just tell them, Mum.
Look, jail will follow you for life. I saw what it did to Dan. It ruined any chance he could have had. He's probably going to end up with Trish. Now get back in your room.
Sammy, look, I love breaking the rules. I fucking love it. It's the main reason why I never learned how to correctly use an apostrophe. But this is crazy. What are you going to do with him?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. You don't know, and I'll tell you why you don't know. Because you don't know how to get rid of a body. Bev would, but you don't. As bad as this may seem right now, getting caught lying and hiding it will be way worse.
You reckon they'll believe us?
Yes. What are you doing, Sammy? Look at yourself.
Oh.
Hello, this is Jim. Whom is this, please, speaking?
It's Chris.
Oh, hello, Christos.
Is Sammy in?
Yep, but she's doing a poo.
Well, I don't mind waiting.
Probably gonna be in there for a while. She hasn't been in days. Might be a three-coiler.
I'll wait at the car. Just send her out when she's finished.
Okay.
What is wrong with you?
Sorry.
Go and get me a coat.
Jim, is he who he's based on, and if it's based on?
Oh, he's my brother. He's completely my brother. There's no creative process there. I sit there with a notepad and write down everything my brother says, and then I type it up into a Word document, and then I just built a show around it. Basically, I mean, I'm joking to an extent, but I mean, he had a freelance gynecologist shirt that he wore when he was 15. He screen printed it himself. And I can remember him sort of heading down to the beach with his sunnies on with this freelance gynecologist shirt. So when we sort of were in production and I was talking to wardrobe, I was like, my brother had this shirt. And then they're like, perfect. They just made a freelance gynecologist shirt. So yeah, I mean, Jim is, and even my brother, he sometimes rings me and just goes, I love watching this show because I'm watching myself. I'm like, yeah, I know. But I think to elaborate on what Clelia is saying, I think as a sort of as a general rule, everything has to be believable. I think the drama, if it gets mawkish, it's saccharine and it's yuck, and if the jokes are cheap and in the wrong person's mouth, I don't believe that. So I think sort of everything has to feel like, without sounding like a wanker, that there has to be a certain integrity to it, and people know when you're trying to trick. I think audiences know when you're trying to trick them. They know when they're being tricked with saccharine sentiment or over sentimentality, and they know when they're being tricked with jokes that don't belong in a scene. They just zone out. They just don't, So I think that there has to be, again, sounding like a wanker, that there does have to be a fairly strict kind of, that person would not say that. That thing would never happen. And I think that's the sort of benefit of, as you say, Merman kind of do this genre of show. So I think that's a safe set of eyes to have on the writing.
And Shaun, from your point of view as the director, did you have, it's all there in the scripts for you, or did you talk to Sarah about how to kind of, from your point of view, maintain that tone between?
I throw out her writing and just make it up on set. Obviously, but no, it's I mean, it's funny with a show like this where like dramedies have become very, very popular, as a lot of them have appeared in the last particularly in the last 10 years or so. But generally, dramedies have been, they're really kind of dramas that just kind of have a few jokes in them, whereas something like Frayed is like, no, we're not. We're doing comedy. We're not messing around. Like, we're fully on doing comedy. But there's also, full on drama in there. So how you wind those two things together when you're not really close to the line all the time, we're flying all over the place. It all ends up becoming it lives or dies in the nuance and in the gear shifts, like finding those, finding just the right tone in the scene that means we can shift the gear at this point, and it's not going to feel, it's not going to push the audience out. They're not going to suddenly feel like they don't understand what show they're watching. And so the joke actually lands, but that drama beforehand hasn't just been, thrown out the window, that there's still, you're still, invested in that drama, but the funny moment that undermines it at the end doesn't undermine the story, if you know what I mean. That's the constant challenge going on with Frayed. But it's just, like any show, the more you make it, the more you find, how that works. A lot of it is, there's a lot of things in season one that we were kind of, figuring out as we went along. And then, I think it's one of the things that's great about season two is both Sarah with her scripts, but also then as we, kind of executed it, we figured out this tone a lot more. And I think season two is a lot more consistent in how that works and how it shifts around and so on. And I think, we've kind of found that balance really well as we've gone along. But I think a lot of it is just down to trusting your gut on these little details and nuances. Not, the broad rules don't really apply as much. So you kind of have to really trust your gut, and we have to kind of creatively trust each other a lot about these things that they're going to work and they're going to land when we get in the edit suite.
That's because I think what you're saying about, how you're getting used to the tone and it's more consistent. But series two, it feels much bigger in a way, to me anyway, as a viewer, that you've got a murder investigation going on. You're jumping between London and Australia a lot. You're jumping between timelines a lot. There's a lot of flashbacks and playing with time, I think, more. And without spoiling anything, it builds to a pretty spectacular climax. So for you, what were the main challenges of that? And did it feel like a bigger and more ambitious show?
Look, a thing that was great about season two was that, that murder that happened at the end of season one gave season two this extremely powerful momentum that just drives all the way through. Season one was all kind of carefully setting up towards that dramatic conclusion. And then season two was like, well, we've wound the car up now and it's going to race off down the road. So that helped a lot, just going, all right, we've always got something that's pushing the story forward, and that makes my job a lot easier to kind of, keep the energy up. But like so many different elements going on. I mean, us shooting this as one big block, having, doing all 6 episodes this time, and having to balance all those elements of jumping between countries and jumping between, the past and the present and so on. It definitely proved challenging, and we were tying ourselves in knots a lot as we shot it. We try as much as possible to schedule it to go, all right, well, this day we're at least just doing this time, but there would be times where it'd be like, oh no, literally, because of how we've done various scenes, particularly in the second episode, there's times where it's like, okay, we have to do the scene that's set there, and then we have to do a really quick costume change and immediately start doing the scene that happens 6 months later. And having a very good crew helps you to sort out all those pieces. Because if like I'm definitely losing the plot a bit here and there, so having a team around you that can kind of help you tie all those strings together because naturally we're shooting out of order and by location and so on, so things get very complicated. So that was definitely a big challenge. But there was also just the challenge everyone's facing at the moment, which is production is complicated enough as it is, and we run into all kinds of challenges. And then you do it in the middle of a pandemic, and things are even more fun. And particularly when you're doing a show that is both set and shot in 2 countries, but also with a cast that's spread across, I think, 3 countries, and trying to fly everyone around when certain countries have very strong border, controls and so on, and trying to wrangle all that. And, airlines just are, making up things as they go because they don't really know what's going on either. Trying to piece a show together this complex in an environment like that definitely... it gave us some challenges.
Yeah, clearly you're juggling a lot of things, it strikes me, with filming this. I mean, it went out a couple of years ago. So were you filming this right at the height of the pandemic, and did that lead to a lot of?
We filmed this beginning of last year, so sort of January to March last year, when we were in lockdown here, but in Australia, in Sydney, they'd just started to open up and there weren't so many cases at that point. Isn't that right, Shaun, if I remember?
But there'd been a short Christmas outbreak, but they'd managed to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So it was...
But borders could close at any minute if there was even one case. So we had to think about casting within Sydney, didn't we? Because
Melbourne and Victoria would get Sydney and Melbourne would get cut off from each other with border closures. It wasn't just the whole country, it was within the country. We'd suddenly not be able to move people around all the time.
So that would have been a problem, because then we wouldn't be able to transport our cast up. And then they had to, obviously people were going into quarantine. I had to sit in a hotel for 2 weeks. So did Diane and Fraser. So that, and Sarah with her family. And I know that was a nightmare for lots of reasons. So we just had to consider all of that, and that adds to your budget, it adds to your schedule. So that was tricky. And then coming back the other way, we had to think about that as well. So it was complicated, but I think once we actually started filming, the rules was, it was slightly more relaxed. We didn't have cohorts like we did in the UK. So it felt, to me, it felt slightly different. And people were actually in a production office. I hadn't been in an office for so long. It felt, and Diane and I both felt quite nervous. We were talking about it, going near people. And obviously we were wearing masks inside. We didn't have to wear masks outside. So all of that felt slightly different, because I'd just come off, we'd been doing Motherland, which was a very different atmosphere leading up to Christmas. And then we were in production for This Way Up at the same time. So I was sending pictures of our lunches outside in the open air by the sea to Sharon on set for This Way Up. She was quite rude in response. I don't know why.
So weird.
Can't believe it.
Yeah, so I mean, we were fortunate. Once we got out and we had everyone there and we could start shooting and everybody was negative and there weren't many cases at that point, it was great, and we didn't have to shut down during that time either.
And Sarah, how was it for you? I mean, how was it juggling all the narrative elements of the show in terms of writing it and then making it in lockdown?
I sort of lost my mind at one point, I'm not going to lie. For me, the challenge, to sort of click the clock back a bit further than filming, was that I was writing the show in the year of lockdowns. So normally when both of my children would have been at school for 6 to 7 hours a day, they were in my lounge room 6 to 7 hours, no, all day. Like, I mean, we had there were 2 lockdowns in 2019. Hang on, I can't remember. Who knows? I don't know.
Time has no meaning anymore, Sarah. Don't worry.
It doesn't matter. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that year of lockdowns, the problem that I had was that each script just came in a bit later than it should have. So there was this kind of knock-on effect that the scripts were kind of a month late, and then the next one was a month late. So then we're 2 months behind it. And that's just what happens when you don't have children in school and you're all inside all day. So then to go from that writing schedule to getting on a plane and then being in a hotel room with them for 2 weeks, quarantining when I should have been in pre-production. It's weird. This morning I was watching Adele sobbing her eyes out, talking about shutting down the Las Vegas show. She's like, we've tried to make it work and we can't. And I'm like, yeah, that's like a production in a pandemic. You forget that you're in a pandemic. And then you look back on it and go, oh, that's why I nearly ended up in hospital because of stomach ulcers. Like, it was a really, it was a very difficult thing with childcare to sort of get that kind of comfortable turnaround of rewrites and even the pre-production time, when normally you'd be in talking to the heads of department and having a look and meeting people and chatting through stuff. Like, none of that was available. It was pretty much leave the hotel, quarantine after 2 weeks and step straight on set. So it did make it a lot more stressful, but thankfully, I think because it was the second season, we already had a very established relationship with each other. I think if it had been first season, it would have been a lot trickier. But at least there was, a bit of a shorthand that we already had, I think.
And a lot of our heads of departments returned as well, who I think all of them did, who knew the show, who knew we'd had all those creative discussions early on during the series, and they understood the characters. The actors obviously understood their characters. We had read-throughs on Zooms. We had a couple of read-throughs. Obviously couldn't really do rehearsals, but I think all of that helped. It always helps anyway going into a second series, but particularly in these conditions, it sped things along a little bit.
Yeah, particularly with having to, there's a lot of like reinventing how you do production in a pandemic, and having a team of people who both understand our show because they've done it before, but they've also already had to make shows during the pandemic, and they come in and go, all right, we've already been through this nightmare. Here's what we actually have to worry about. It's very, very helpful for us to be able to keep things rolling.
I got to say, from a writer's perspective, there's nothing quite as devastating as a Zoom read through. And I've spoken to so many script writers. You just want to go and slit your throat. You sit through the read through, and it's like this. It's just like a bunch of, and none of the jokes land. Everyone's looking down, and you get to the end of the read through and just go, I have nothing. There is no script here. Nothing works. And it's quite reassuring having spoken to other script writers about just how devastating Zoom read-throughs are. I mean, they're tough. They're really, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like particularly with comedy, it's a fascinating thing with comedy, just how specific the rhythm is. And when you've got Zoom, where not only people not in the same room, so they can't really vibe off each other as well, but also there's little delays and everything, going on with Zoom. And so you don't get that comedic rhythm that we spend. I mean, when we get into the edit, when we're cutting comedy, we're literally getting in there and cutting frame by frame each line to really find that exact rhythm to land a cut and a gag. And, it's a friend of mine, who's a comedian, talks about it as, comedy is music. And it really is. You've got to get this rhythm perfect. So yes, sitting on Zoom and watching these, awkward pauses and then, weird overlaps and no one getting any kind of audio feedback because everyone else has got to have their microphones off while the person's talking. So they just say a joke and it's just crickets for,
Oh man. All you see is just joke after joke failing. You're like, okay, this is getting nothing. That's getting nothing. Even though your brain knows you're on Zoom, but I mean, not hearing any laugh is, that was kind of the sleepless nights in hotel quarantine of me just going, this is never going to work.
Well, you never know from the final product. Let me make that clear.
That's because after the read, we just totally rewrote it.
Throw it out. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I want to ask about you've got joint Diane Morgan and Robert Webb already reprising their roles. Diane, astonishingly funny, obviously, but Gemma Whelan joins the cast, who plays a lawyer, and obviously she's phenomenal. I interviewed her for she did a crime drama called The Tower last year on ITV. I mean, her character in this is unrecognizable from that, for example. Did you have her in mind, Sarah, or did you? I mean, she's obviously she's a legend.
Yeah, I mean, we had a wish list of people, and I was, because I knew Gemma back from when she used to do character comedy. Like there were a few nights where we'd sort of overlap professionally. But then she got cast in this really, I don't know if you've heard of it. She got cast in this, it's a little art house production, and not many people have seen it. It's called Game of Thrones.
Yeah, period piece, right?
Yeah. It's all
set in the Middle Ages, I think. Yeah.
It's crazy. So she got cast in that. And so she sort of went, off into the stratosphere. So when I saw her name, I was like, oh my God. And then when I found out that she'd said yes, I was like, shit. I was like really excited.
Yeah, she's got a lot of latitude. Obviously that role in that whatever that HBO show is fairly well known. But people flat out, people who have seen season 2 and don't know Gemma from other things just did not recognize that that's the same person. She has so much latitude. She plays, comes in on Game of Thrones playing this, absolute, like leading an army, destroying stuff kind of character. And then we introduce her as this quiet, meek lawyer sitting in an office. And it's, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's actually got
But
her Game of Thrones sword behind the lawyer's desk. It's actually a crossover special.
she is so good though, because people have said, oh, in Australia, I love season 2. It was great. And I was like, yeah, how great was Gemma Whelan? And they're like, where was she? What? And like, from Game of Thrones. And she's so good that people, because as you say, people don't recognize her from Game of Thrones because she's just so believable.
She just inhabits a very different role very well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
You've got big 80s hair. I want to ask about the 80s thing, because the whole thing, you wear it very lightly, don't you? You could have, you have certain music moments where you reminded it's the 80s, and obviously everyone's dressed and hair and everything is 80s, but you don't emphasize it that much. Is that a conscious decision on your part to kind of play it quite lightly, the period?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want it, like those back to the 80s discos and everyone dresses up, and for the and nobody dressed like that in the 80s. Like, you sort of want to say to these people, literally people were wearing jeans and t-shirts. So you don't want it to look like a back to the 80s disco, because it's noisy and it interferes with things. It's not believable. Like if someone just comes in fluorescent leg warmers, but nobody was doing that. So except Shaun. But
yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So yeah, you didn't. Once it becomes intrusive and not real anymore, it that suspension of disbelief. You just don't want it interfering with the relationships and what's happening in the scene. And if it's too loud, the volume's set, too noisy, already it's a cheap gag.
Yeah, it's interesting. The 80s thing, it gives us a lot. There's the kind of nostalgia aspect that, that everyone utilizes a little bit if they're doing an 80s thing, but and it gives us it gives us a number of like dramatic things that are useful. One is some obvious things like people don't have mobile phones and so on, which just makes plotting easier in terms of cutting off communication from people and so on. But there's also, things like having a show that's set between London and Newcastle in Australia. The world was bigger back then. We didn't have the internet kind of interconnecting culture so much. So it gives you a much stronger shift, going from London to Newcastle. It's, kind of an hour, a couple of hours north of Sydney. Those two are much more different worlds than they are now, where we kind of, there's much more of a shared language and a shared experience of the world now. But back then it was like, that's going to, it really did feel like the other side of the planet, at that point when you're jumping over, which, was something we leaned into heavily from the get-go. We went, okay, we don't want to lean in massively heavily on the over-the-top 80s thing. But what we did decide on very early on was leaning in heavily on the London versus Newcastle thing. We really leaned in on London being, kind of very, controlled and, kind of a lot of blues and greys and kind of old world textures and so on. And with the shift to Australia, then going into this kind of chaotic handheld, which kind of reflected what Sammy, Sarah's character, was going into a suddenly new chaotic experience. But, getting, everything suddenly really, blasting sun and yellowed out and getting a lot more, natural textures in there and so on, and really playing up that connection to the beach and everything. So they could really strongly feel like different worlds when we jumped between them, which was great that we could, continue to do that in season 2, where we were still jumping back and forth between London and Newcastle. But then, of course, introducing the other layer of going, we have London in the present, Newcastle in the present, and Newcastle in the past. So we're suddenly going, all right, now we need to visually distinguish that a little bit as well. And, it's just, adding another layer to that visual language, which was fun to do.
Plus the grey days in Australia and the bright sun didn't help.
Yeah, that didn't help. You kind of have these theories of how you're going to shoot things, and then a TV schedule and the weather you actually get. We had days shooting season 2 in Newcastle where it was literally like 150 millimeters of rain, like monsoon level rain. And we're like, yeah, and this is another one of these scenes where it's meant to be bright and sunny and everything's looking lovely, so we can go to London and it looks all overcast and grey. But yes, thankfully there's a lot of tricks you can do to kind of work around that, but definitely a challenge.
There's a contrast, isn't there, between there's an amazing huge cave location in
that cave. That was a real fun day. That's like a tidal sea cave, which meant, there was only literally certain hours of the day that it wasn't underwater in you know, inside a cave. So we're literally, as we only had a certain amount of time to shoot in there, and literally as we're shooting the last shots of, you know, rushing through to get these scenes done, there were times where we had to cut because a wave would come in and literally just, you know, go up to like, you know, ankle deep over the actors' legs and stuff, and you'd see the camera guys kind of shifting around out of the way and so on. It's made for some amusing outtakes, but yeah, our assistant director, who's, you know, responsible for schedule and safety, was getting very nervous about that day, but we talked him into it.
I tell you, I loved it, Boyd, because it meant they got through the scene quickly, and you know.
Although I was going to say though, the two people who, well, I mean George and Ben, who I did those scenes with, they're both the people who I do tend to kind of they do make me laugh in scenes, and I find it very hard to do. And I did keep on laughing at the end of. I just kept on, and then I was like, "Come on, the tide's coming!" Like all those things that make it so much worse when everyone's getting pissed off. The tide's coming in. We just need.
We can't move the moon. The tide's going to do what the tide's going to do.
You cannot laugh at Ben's face in this scene. And I could just see slightly over the shoulder. I can see the corner of George's mouth twitch. I'm like, and then I'm gone. And yeah, that was one of those ones where I was like, just get it together and stop laughing. Stop. And I mean, I just end up not looking at the actor. I have to sort of look at a point beyond their head. I'm not very good at that.
There's other couple of locations I wanted to ask you about. Lasagna Palace. Does that exist?
There is. There is.
We had to rename it.
We did. Can I say the name of the?
Oh, sure. I'm going to say it's not the producer. That feels like a safe thing to do.
Yeah.
I think it's fun as long as you don't say derogatory about it.
Yeah.
It was. I think it was Don Bepino's House of Lasagna. Wow. And it's in the suburb that I grew up in, and we used to go there in the 80s every weekend to Don Bepino's. And then I just wrote it into the script because, like, I just, you know, again, complete lack of imagination. And then we couldn't use Don Bepino's, and then we came up with, was it Lucente's House of Lasagna?
Lasagna Palace, I think.
Lucente's
Lasagna Palace.
Because Ben has a friend who's a chef called Lucente, so we just kind of scrambled it on the day, I think.
Yeah, it was funny with Don Bepino's because Alexandra Jensen, who plays Abby, who's a Newcastle, you know, born and bred girl. When she read the Don Pepino's thing in the script, she was like, "Are we actually going to Don Pepino's?" Like, apparently it's quite a big deal in Newcastle.
Don Pepino's,
yeah.
And where did you shoot the whole police station elements?
Oh man,
kind of.
Yeah, the police station was. We had this, another interesting pressure with COVID is trying to. You suddenly need locations where you can isolate yourself from other things as much as possible. So you're not getting cross-contamination with the general public and so on as much, or just, other businesses and so on. And you're also wanting locations that have a lot more physical space in them. So, because a lot of the time you get film crews and you jam them into these tiny rooms in tiny buildings. That's just been what we've done. But obviously during a pandemic, that's a bad idea. So, but we found this amazing building in Enfield in Sydney that was like one of these places that's probably going to get knocked down in about a year and turn into a block of flats. But it was an old business, a building that had been built, once in the 70s, then that attached a new whole building in like the 80s, and then a whole other section in the 90s. And the whole thing was largely empty and just, gave us. There was actually a lot of locations in Frayed too that are just in this one aging weird building. So the police station was in the basement, which we kind of painted a particular color and gave it a particular feel and lit it a particular way. Whereas 2 floors up was George's office, the MP's office, which we then did up in a completely different way and used the different elements that are up there. And yeah, just kind of there was the radio station was in there as well. Like, it was just one of these really great finds that meant we could kind of isolate ourselves nicely and just plonk there for you know, a lot of the shoot and just kind of tick off a bunch of locations. And thankfully, you know, Fiona, our production designer, was very good at, you know, just turning all these different places into these completely different things without it being an actual established studio that gives you all the, you know, the useful things a studio gives you. It's just like, no, this is literally an old building that has boarded up windows, and, you know, we literally have to like clean smashed glass out of rooms and stuff because, you know, people are just going there at night and breaking in and getting drunk and so on. So we kind of had to turn it into our own little studio, which was, you know, quite useful in the end. But yeah.
And the place, Sarah, where Sammy and the kids end up in London is brilliantly grim and grimy. It's like a grey kind of horrible little place that they're stuck in.
Yeah. That was an abandoned psychiatric ward in Sydney. Is that
yeah, the interior was in Sydney, the exterior was in London, but the interior
right.
was in Sydney.
Yeah, so there's this, they do go, was it you, Shaun, who was telling me that like there's always film crews there doing ghost movies, because
it's a whole, not quite abandoned. I think there's certain buildings, it's a whole area, I've forgotten the name of the area, but it's like, you know, one of these places that's been, you know, there for, you know, a couple of 100 years or something, and they've, you know, slowly over time moved things to other places in Sydney, and they just left these buildings to kind of fall apart. And yeah, there's literally, you walk around looking for spots to film, and it's just like walking through one big horror movie. You're just waiting for stuff to jump out of, you know, cupboards and stuff at you. It's
and they thought that looked like London.
Yeah, well, like, this feels like London. Yeah, that's what.
Yes, this has the grim hopelessness of a downtrodden population.
Yeah.
It really does. I wanted to ask about your kids in the show. Tess, played by Maggie Allen-Jones, she has a whole new look. I think she has the biggest change in terms of look from series 1 to 2.
Yeah. I mean, I love this, you know, those comedy tropes that kind of recur. I love pissy teenagers. It just makes me laugh so much. And I wasn't really a pissy teenager. Like, I think there's a lot of acting out there, but I just thought, oh God, Mum, Jesus, shut up. Like, she just has this complete 180 from the little angel she was in season 1. And she's such a great actress. You know, she didn't, in terms of her plot line, you know, she certainly featured a lot more prominently in season 1 because of her relationship with Abby. So I still wanted her to have, you know, stuff happening to her and there to be a shift in her life. But she certainly wasn't kind of at the coalface of the major plotline developments, which just sometimes happens with, you know, there are some seasons where you go, this is really this character's season, and other seasons where, you know, other people aren't quite as prominent. But she's such a great actress, so, you know,
Yeah, well, she also had the big challenge of, you know, there was that, you know, big shift in her, you know, after what she's gone through, she's shifted into the very different visual, but also her character's shifted a bit. But because, of course, we've written all these flashbacks, you know, that she has to do, you know, as a quite young actor. When we shot season 2, I think she was 16, and she's having to, you know, not only do the makeup and costume department have to be dealing with 2 completely different looks for her that would be jumping between, but, you know, in herself, she's having to jump back and forth between a kind of, you know, pre and post trauma version of her character, basically, which she did an amazing job of, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to ask about one scene, though, and they'll know when they get to it. It's a scene where Diane Morgan goes to visit her detective boyfriend in the police station, and there's a slapstick element to it. I mean, a brilliantly timed slapstick. She's given a gun, you know, they're talking about the investigation. It's quite a serious thing. It's got all the elements, I think, of the show in that scene. Do you remember filming that? I mean, just the slapstick thing alone would have had me laughing constantly.
Oh, hey.
Bought you this very expensive present because you're so depressed.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, look, and a card.
Yeah. No, wait.
Dear Fiona, we're so relieved your surgery went well. Please move back to Bolton. Love, Mum and Dad. What was your surgery?
Anal polyp. Like your wall of photos. That was my idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's useless now, isn't it? They want to go with suspected suicide. They just want the case closed today. You look good with a gun.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Could have been a police officer. I always work out who did it on Murder, She Wrote before Jessica Fletcher.
Hand lotion's so creamy.
Say it out loud.
That hand lotion's so creamy.
No, say out loud what you know. Jessica Fletcher always does that and works it out. Also recaps the plot for the viewer.
Okay. Terry's wife was in Sydney. His lovers were all at their respective jobs. And these ex-cons, they all had grudges, but their alibis check out. Now, Terry's neighbour, Jim Cooper, he was shooting pigeons, but he does that regularly and he has no motive.
Well, I worked with his sister Sammy before she flew back to London. She called Chris a fat, delusional fox-stain. Very good judge of character.
Now, Jean Cooper also has no motive, but she's a bit sus. Her husband went swimming 20 years ago, never returned.
I read the most peaceful way to die is drowning. And apparently the least peaceful way is having someone power drill into your temple.
Jean Cooper also had some unusual dealings with this woman.
Bev.
Well, you know her.
She came into the office once to see Sammy. She also turned up at my birthday party, and I'm pretty sure she stole my microwave.
Well, Jean Cooper gave her a bag filled with cash. See, Beverly Spray is the only one I haven't been able to speak to yet.
Jessica Fletcher would definitely interview her before the case is closed.
Hey, Fairbank, how'd the meeting go?
The fuck is this, you little piece of tail on this side?
No.
I knew you were lying to me.
No, that's...
Constable Emily Sutherland, colleague.
Oh, hey, I'm Fiona.
Oh, hi. Nice to finally meet you.
And you. Now, keep this.
Did a lot of takes on that one. Yeah.
Is it too comedy? Is it too... There were lots of notes like, is that too ridiculous? Is that...
Yeah. Like, yeah, when you've got, I mean, without wanting to spoil what it is, but yeah, there's Hamish doing it, Hamish who played Fairbank, the cop, doing some physical comedy and yeah, just doing it again and making him do it again and again and again with a little, perhaps your head's doing something a bit weird there that's distracting from the gag, but it is a scene, it's a really fun scene to do because there is a whole lot of effectively trying to distract the audience from the other gag that's about to happen. Anytime, it's the whole magic trick thing. You're constantly, getting the audience to look at what's going on with this character so you don't realize something ridiculously comedic is about to happen with this other character in the scene. There's a lot of that going on. And when you've got, Hamish was new to the show. We actually shot that in the first week for scheduling reasons. We had to shoot all Diane stuff very, very quickly. So Hamish had just jumped into the show. He'd just figuring out this character, which was quite a complicated character to play and a difficult tone to nail. But yeah, he did a fantastic job of that. And of course, having Diane Morgan, who, just makes me laugh, whatever she does, just throwing those two in a scene. And also Emma Harvey, who pops into that scene as well, who plays Emily, the other cop, who was, new to the show too, who did a great job. It was a really fun scene.
Just on that, it was really in terms of like how I was going to configure the cast and who was going to be where plot wise. There was, when you have a dead body and an investigation, you do have to go through every logical step that the police officer would be going through, which is not always thrilling. So having a Diane Morgan in the scene or having an incident that you're talking about makes it you can get that kind of information across to the viewer, but you can sort of sweeten it because it's otherwise I slightly lost my mind with the machinery of the plot, and I had a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard I had who knew what and when they knew it, just so I could constantly refer to who knows what and what point did they find it out. So it was really handy for me to have Diane very closely in with that plot line because it meant that you put Diane in the scene and funny stuff will happen. It makes the scenes a lot lighter, otherwise there's a hell of a lot of stuff that you've got to work through logically. So that for me tonally really worked to have her with the detective.
I was going to Sorry,
I was going to say there were quite a few conversations back in the UK when Sarah was writing the consequences of what would happen with a dead body. So she would ring me, she would write in a cafe and ring me and said, I'm just trying to work out where to put the body and what happens to a body after they die. And if it's in a public place, I'm surprised you weren't arrested, but you did do quite a lot of research as well, didn't you?
So much research about, all the different things, like about decomposition and what happens to the corpse at what stage. And I mean, it wasn't.
I don't know if I told you, Sarah, a friend of mine who's worked in the funeral industry for many years and is not anymore, watched the second season and was like, you know what? That was all incredibly accurate to what actually happens to bodies.
Thank you.
Yeah, she was quite impressed. She watches a lot of television and goes, well, that's nonsense. That's not how they decompose.
No.
So you did pretty well.
Erring on the side of what's believable, but
I was going to ask you, because not only you're writing quite a complicated situation with the dead body and the investigation and who knows what when, you kind of parcel that information out very carefully, which makes it, but it's very clear to watch, though, I have to say. But you also give yourself and your character huge amounts to do as an actor, and you were nominated for a BAFTA, we should say, for series 1, which must have been great reflection of your performance. Did you, when you're writing scenes where you're going to have to act it, like, do you kind of, just not worry about that at all, and then when you get to it, you film it and you're fine, or do you worry about that?
I don't know. When I'm writing it, I've sort of got to keep an eye on everyone, and making sure to the best of my capabilities that the story's working. So I don't really worry about it. It's only when I get on set and go, oh shit, I've got to act this now. It all made sense when I was writing it at the computer and rewriting it and making sure that the beats of the story and the beats of the character and the narrative and the character arc and all that sort of stuff, which is why having a director who can kind of pull me aside and go, Sarah, you're doing it all wrong.
Which I would have to say a lot, like
every fucking day.
Constantly.
Sarah, stop overacting. It's not the Sarah Kendall show. So that really helped me, because I was doing accents and funny hats and
as is your usual brand of comedy.
Shaun was like, lose the fez, Sarah. It's not. No
can you lose at least 2 of the 3 hats you're wearing?
Hairstyle was overacting a bit as well, wasn't it? It was just too big.
Yeah.
It is actually really helpful when you've got. I've done a few shows where it's the person who's written it is starring in the lead, and it's actually really helpful when there's something in the script that's horrible they have to do, like just because they're going to get really cold or if they have to do vomit or something like that. When they're the one that wrote it, you don't feel bad at all pushing them to do it well. You're like, this is all your fault. Don't complain to me about it. You put this in the script.
Yeah. I mean, the things that you will write at a computer when you're in a lovely warm cafe having a latte, and then you're on set and it's 10 o'clock at night and there's a rain machine. You're like, the fuck did I do that for? This is bullshit. Next thing I write is going to be set at a dinner party for 6 episodes.
No, you don't want that, because then you have to eat way too much food the same way every time. That's also
or never just have the fork there for the whole scene.
Just get really good at hovering food near your mouth, not actually eating it. Yeah.
That's right.
And I am going to ask about there's a development, shall we say, towards the end of episode 5, and then episode 6 deals with the fallout. It's a big thing, Shaun. It's a big development.
It was, yes.
We're talking around it.
Sure.
That must have been a challenge.
Yeah, look, we got into some real kind of, this is the stuff you're more meant to do in a feature film kind of territory at the end of what was already quite a complex storyline. So it definitely added a challenge. Like it's already a very complex show in terms of we shot all 6 episodes at once, so they're all kind of mixed up together in a blender in the schedule. And we've got, it's the kind of show where there's always about 5 different plots going on, because every character's got their own little path going on that Sarah's kind of wound together. So it's keeping track of all that business and, the jumps in location and time and so on. And then adding in these very large kind of, effects heavy kind of things we were doing later in the season, and how we pull those off on our, comedy budget, and it was definitely a big challenge. But there is the thing of, as much as sometimes adding those elements means everyone has to work very hard and the crew has to work very hard, the crew also like doing something different. So it's something that is a bit of a challenge. So as much as it's definitely exhausting at times doing that kind of stuff, getting to jump into stuff, that's been the fun thing with Frayed, is so many crazy elements all thrown together in the one show. So and getting to experiment with all that and try to make it fit together as a cohesive whole, and actually execute it in a way, because it's funny when you're doing kind of big stuff in a show, the big fear is because you've got the key thing going, right, the key thing is we need to it needs to deliver the story element. It needs to make sense in the story. It means when that scene happens, people need to understand that this is happening. That's the basic thing you need to achieve. But you've got this thing in your back of your head of going, it also needs to not look embarrassing. Like there's, in the past, the way a lot of, shows have dealt with this is you'll have, characters kind of standing there going, wow, look at that big thing. Isn't it a big thing? And the audience never actually sees it. But we didn't want to do that. Frayed's always been a show with, particularly with a lot of, really kind of chaotic handheld kind of work. We've always tried to really be in there with the characters and experiencing what they're experiencing. So, we really threw ourselves at that and, just added for the fun of it, in that same episode where there's a lot going on to help sell it, doing some of these, more extended kind of single shots where we're, having cameras in a car and then the camera comes out of the car without cutting and moves around and so on, all these kind of things that are fun challenges for the crew and just, keep it really visually interesting and just make film production, which is of course very easy. Just add a few layers of complexity to that. But
can I just add on a slightly sentimental note? I was on the episode that the sort of explosive finale. Sorry,
with the spaceship.
Yes.
We do it. No, Clelia!
Oh, you spoiled the jump into sci-fi. Oh.
It was a huge filming challenge, and I was incredibly sort of moved by how hard everybody worked, and everybody was up against it, and it did ask a lot of everyone, and everyone just fucking got into it and dug in, and it was there was a moment when I was with the other actors and I went, I'm so sorry about this, because it was late at night and everybody was getting tired, and nobody complained, and I was really, as I say, I was really moved by how hard everybody worked, and they weren't pleasant filming conditions for anyone. So yeah, that was stuff like that. You sort of you remember. It was really.
I think it's a key thing. There's been a lot of talk lately about certain people in the film industry and how they have treated people on their productions in the past and so on. It's all the usual kind of gossip becoming very public stuff that's been happening, and about a lot of the industry looking at itself and how do we treat people and how do people in power get away with treating people different ways and so on. And I think Frayed is, I've certainly on all my shows tried to keep a certain vibe on the set that is not one of these kind of tense, everyone yelling at each other kind of things. There's a way to be expedient, but also keep things, up and lighthearted and keep people having a good time as we go. And one of the reasons you want to do that is because everyone's a human and we're doing this together for weeks, and let's just treat each other well. But also when you do respect your team and treat them well, and then you say, I'm really sorry, guys, but we have to do this really difficult thing and really, really go for it. They actually go, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll go with you on that. And they back you up on it. And that's, that's just one of the advantages of actually treating people like humans.
Yeah.
I love you, Sarah. I mean, they love you and the script, and, they want to make you happy as well, and proud of the show. And they're so proud to be in it. So it's all you as well, not just the directors.
No.
No, Shaun was pretty emphatic. It was about.
I'm pretty sure it's just me.
He created.
Yeah. No, there is. I mean, that's the thing with directing TV in general. There is no, singular. People talk about showrunners and so on, but the reality is that, when you're making a TV show, you've got a group of people that all have to cohesively work together. There's certain, there's people like, Sarah and Clelia and myself and others that are kind of, there for the whole, almost all the journey to, really make sure this thing fits together. And we've really got to be on the same page about stuff and going back and forth on things, because there is, the whole auteur, like there's one person who kind of defines doesn't really work. But, that said, it is still very much the Sarah Kendall story that she lets us kind of carry with her along the way.
It doesn't feel like that.
Are you going to rename it the Sarah Kendall story? Is that what you're
Sarah Kendall story.
Yeah,
Frayed,
yeah.
the Sarah Kendall story. Yeah.
Yeah. Semicolon, the Sarah Kendall story.
Yeah.
No, but I must say, once pre-production starts, it no longer feels like this. For the writing process, it's a bit lonely. But then once you go into production, I think in my rather tearful speech on the last day, it feels like you're all birthing this thing together. So I think you're sort of, to go on with this slightly uncomfortable metaphor, you're pregnant while you're writing.
Where's the placenta in this scenario?
Unfortunately, I ate the placenta. Shaun.
Okay, fair enough.
But yes, no, I do think that the production side is it is a team birthing process.
On that slightly queasy analogy, average amount of time, I should say. So it's a perfect place to end.
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? A reminder to everyone that the series is available from 23rd of February on Sky Max and now, and is a brilliant second series. I've seen the whole thing, lucky enough to have seen the whole thing, and it's a box set drop on that day as well. And just leave me to say thank you so much to Clelia, Shaun and Sarah for your insights into Frayed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Boyd.